There's nothing more satisfying than taking a great idea and making it a reality. But what about those ideas that seem so crazy they couldn't possibly work? Well, sometimes those crazy ideas wind up working way better than expected. From mind-controlled video games to pooping for profit, prepare to be blown away as we take a look at some of the wackiest ideas that actually work. Musical madness. No matter where you are in the world, drivers racing down roads at speeds far over the legal limit remains a dangerous problem. However, in 2014, the New Mexico Department of Transportation teamed up with National Geographic to create a whimsically song-based solution. This strip of road on Route 333 has been modified such that any motorist that drives across its length is treated to a rendition of the patriotic U.S. classic America the Beautiful. Okay, so it's not quite Ray Charles, but it's still impressive. What's more, the mysterious music only plays when you're driving at exactly the speed limit. So, how does it work? Well, special grooves called rumble strips are installed along the road at varying intervals from one another. When driven over, these rough strips cause cars to vibrate at very specific frequencies, generating audible tones. However, the song will only become recognizable when driven over at precisely 45 miles per hour, encouraging drivers to stick to the speed limit. Despite what my inner rebel tells me, I guess following the rules can be fun. But do you know what's even more fun? Slaying hordes of creatures, leveling up heroic champions, and taking on ultimate bosses in the terrifying Doom Tower of Raid Shadow Legends. On the slight chance you haven't heard already, Raid is an epic fantasy RPG that you can play on PC or on your smartphone. It's the only reason for having your phone out in class or at work that your superiors will understand. Assemble your favorite champions, grind out XP, and earn heaps of silver and artifacts to become more powerful than your teachers or boss can ever hope to be. Not enough for you? Well, the newly added Guardian Ring gives you a whole host of exciting new ways to use your champions and boost their power. And that's not all. At the start of December, one of the biggest, most anticipated feature updates ever is coming to the game. Trust me, it's going to be huge. So, download Raid Shadow Legends now using the link in the description or my QR code and instantly unlock the epic hero Shonaru, who's super powerful in the Doom Tower, 200,000 silver, an XP boost, an energy refill, and even an ancient shard so you can summon your first awesome champion straight away. All done? Right then, let's check out some more crazy ideas that actually work. Pet rock? Whether it's a dog, cat, or pony, there's always been a demand for animals as pets. But no one would want a pet rock, right? Wrong. Back in 1975, down-and-out freelance copywriter Gary Dahl was having a drink and listening to his friends complain about their pets at the pub. Jokingly, he suggested owning a rock for a pet. A rock couldn't possibly give anyone any trouble, he mused. But even as everybody laughed, the idea began to cement itself in Dahl's mind. Days later, he found himself purchasing a load of smooth rocks at just 1 cent apiece. He also bought straw, which was even cheaper. Then, putting his writing skills to good use, Dahl drafted a full 32-page manual with detailed instructions for keeping the rocks as pets. The manual jokingly describes things like pet rock first aid, and there are even instructions on how to train your pet rock. For example, shake hands is almost impossible to teach the rock. Attack, however, was very simple, with the physical help of the owner, of course. The box, meanwhile, had ventilation holes punched along the top, and the rock sat snugly inside, nestled on a bed of straw. Dahl put the pet rock on the market in time for the Christmas rush, and the response was above anyone's expectations. Astoundingly, by February of 1976, over 1 million of the stones had been sold, and at $4 apiece, Dahl was made a millionaire almost overnight. Move aside, Mick Jagger. Gary Dahl is the only real rock star. Pet rocks, what a crazy idea. What's not so crazy though is smashing those like and subscribe buttons. I'm always uploading amazing new content and you're not gonna want to miss out on what I've got planned next. But where were we? Waddling warriors. Back at the start of 2020, the Chinese government realized it was about to face a huge, potentially devastating airborne problem. And no, I'm not talking about COVID-19. A 400 billion strong swarm of ferocious flying locusts were heading straight towards China's border. Swarms of the pests had already ravaged their way through eastern Africa, South Asia, and Pakistan, destroying crops at an alarming rate, crippling the country's economies. Eastern Africa lost a whopping $128 million fighting the critters in 2020. So, what was China's plan to stop the onslaught? Ducks. And I mean lots and lots of ducks. The quirky quackers had proven themselves once before, fighting off a similar horde 20 years earlier. Back then, each duck chowed down on an average of 200 locusts a day. So, China's government enlisted a colossal legion of 100,000 of them in 2020, gathering at China's Pakistan border, ready to block the 400 billion locusts approaching through Pakistan in an epic battle. Tense quacks filled the air, but this time, it wasn't meant to be. Experts had warned China to call off the attack and use pesticide instead, which they did. Although the ducks had excelled back in 2000 when they were fighting in China, in 2020 they would have been fighting in Pakistan. With soaring temperatures that can exceed 117 degrees Fahrenheit and bone-dry deserts in some parts of the country, it could have been a disaster for the water-reliant ducks. Pulled back from the front line, they waddled wearily away. However, next time China's crops are threatened, maybe they won't require a quactical retreat. Transparent toilets. Let's be honest, nobody enjoys using public toilets. But these toilets in Tokyo, Japan, take public pooping anxiety to a whole new level. That's because the cubicle walls are made from transparent glass. Part of the Tokyo Toilet Project, they're designed to combat the stereotype in Japan of public toilets being dark, dirty, smelly, and scary. If you ask me though, a see-through toilet cubicle is as scary as it gets. But despite how exposed it appears, there's little chance of anyone actually seeing you do your business. The glass walls aren't made of any old glass, no. They're smart glass. When the cubicle door is unlocked, an electric current is passed through the crystals in the glass panel, making them transparent. When locked, the electricity is cut off and the panels become opaque. So even in the event of a power failure, the walls won't suddenly turn see-through. Why does this make Tokyo's toilets any better than regular public toilets then? Well, they let you see exactly what the state of the cubicle is before you even enter, which could save you a nasty surprise. You'll be discouraged from leaving any nasty surprises too, because when you're finished, everyone will be able to see exactly how you've left the place. Blaming the person before you won't cut it this time, you filthy animal. Fryin' flyers. When you think of protests, you probably imagine a mass of people holding signs with impassioned messages of change on them. But back in 2019, thousands of people protesting inequality in Chile held laser pointers, and for an ingenious reason. You see, when protests or riots break out, police use drones to accurately assess the situation from above so they can prepare an appropriate ground response. However, protesters in Chile theorized that if they all brought laser pointers to the gathering and shone them together on one drone at a time, the concentrated light might disrupt the drone somehow. So they tried it. Astonishingly, the lasers really did work. About 40 to 50 of them were aimed at the flying police robot, but theories varied as to what actually caused it to crash to the ground. Some people think the combined power of the lasers generated enough heat to melt the plastic on the drone and cause it to malfunction. Others think it overloaded the drone's optical sensor so the operator couldn't see through the camera, forcing them to land. After checking out the view from above, this is the theory I'm leaning towards. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Backwards in Bathinda. Way back in 2003, taxi driver Harpreet Dev was driving home late one night in northern India when his Fiat Padmini got stuck in reverse gear. Without the money to get it repaired, Harpreet turned his head behind him and began driving backwards towards his hometown of Bathinda. The longer he reversed, the more confident he got, and by the time Harpreet had returned home, an idea had formed in his head. Instead of getting his car fixed, what if he modified the gearbox to have 4 reverse gears and only 1 forward gear? The talented taxi driver had always wanted to do something unique in his life, and this was his opportunity. As time went on, tales of the backwards taxicabs spread throughout Bathinda, and Harpreet became something of a local celebrity. He even managed to get a special government license allowing him to drive backwards in any state in northern India. In fact, the daring driver became so adept at his unique mode of transportation that in 2005, he reversed all the way from Rajasthan, India, 350 miles to Lahore in Pakistan to promote peace between the two countries. Unfortunately for Harpreet, all the time spent looking over his shoulder has given him some severe back and neck problems. But does he let that stop him? Of course not. According to Harpreet, achieving something special is never easy. True, but personally, I'm gonna stick to driving forwards. Geese police. If you're ever out wandering the rural parts of China's Xinjiang province and pass a police station, you might see a very strange sight indeed. That's because in this notoriously crime-ridden region of China, police have begun using guard geese instead of guard dogs. As crazy as it sounds, the geese actually have several distinct advantages over their canine counterparts. For one, they're incredibly loud, even whilst eating. If a thief breaks into your house and throws a steak on the floor, your hungry hound might be too distracted and fail to alert you of the coming danger. However, if you own a goose, they'll still honk loudly whilst gobbling up their meal. What's more, intruders could throw a piece of drugged food and take out the standard solitary guard dog in one fell swoop, and their numbers and noises will make that bewildered burglar wish they'd never come. Of course, owning a personal goose battalion has its challenges, but for the Chinese police force, it's been a startling success. Back in 2013, a man tried to break into a police station in Xinjiang to steal back his confiscated motorbike. It was the dead of night, and he'd successfully drugged the 2 guard dogs. Confidently, he climbed over the wall and was met with a terrifying sight. 20 geese, all eyeballing him, fanning their wings, and aggressively shrieking. Cops that had been sleeping in the station overnight were awoken, and the criminal was caught. So, next time you're considering a new animal sidekick, why not go for a goose or 10? Beaver butt juice. When you're chowing down on a delicious vanilla ice cream, the last thing you want to imagine is that it came from the rear end of some wild animal. But if you lived in the early 20th century, chances are you'd have tried beaver butt juice at least once in your life. Turns out beavers have a gland just beneath their tails that secretes the sticky brown goo. This sludge is not poop, but smells and tastes just like vanilla. So much so, in fact, that folks 100 years ago used it to flavor ice cream, cakes, and anything else they fancied. While it's best not to ponder how people figured out how this stuff tastes, the secretion is actually called castoreum, and its puzzlingly pleasant smell and taste are byproducts of the beaver's plant-based diet. Castoreum is made from a bunch of chemical compounds, several of which work as pheromones, and beavers use it to mark territory and communicate with one another, which is pretty far removed from our use for it. Extracting castoreum from a beaver is no easy task. You can't just hold an ice cream cone under there and hope for the best. First, the beaver has to be anesthetized. Then, someone has the unenviable job of manually milking its castor glands. Given how impractical, not to mention gross, that process is, castoreum only accounts for a tiny fraction of all vanilla flavoring nowadays, though you can still find it in alcoholic beverages and premium ice cream. Guess I'll stick to the cheap stuff then. The Great French Potato Ploy. Way back in mid-18th century France, a terrible fear had gripped the nation. It wasn't a fear of death or war, but rather potatoes. Spanning from unfounded suspicions about the fact that potatoes grew underground, people saw the tubers as spreaders of disease and even the cause of leprosy. Although there was no evidence supporting these views, in 1748, the French Parliament went so far as to declare the potato illegal. But after being captured by the Prussians during the 7 Years' War, French Army medical officer Antoine-Augustin Parmentier's opinion drastically changed. Parmentier was fed potatoes during his imprisonment, and to his disbelief, he was totally fine. So upon his release, Parmentier made it his mission to spread the good word. After years of tireless work, he eventually succeeded, and the ban was lifted in 1772. But still, many people wouldn't touch the much maligned vegetable. Then, one day, Parmentier had an idea. People didn't want to eat them because they saw them as undesirable. Therefore, he just had to make them desirable. So, Parmentier turned a piece of land he owned into a potato patch, hiring several heavily armed guards to make a great show of defending the spuds. His thinking was that people would see the guards and assume the potatoes were worth stealing. Parmentier waited, and sure enough, people began stealing the potatoes. From then on, demand began to increase, and widespread opinion of the root vegetable changed, all thanks to one man's impassioned ploy. I'm sure Parmentier would be smiling in his grave if he knew there was now such a thing as French fries. 0 zebras. A trip to the zoo can be fun, but without interesting animals, there's no reason to go, right? The owners of Mata Land Zoo in Gaza knew this all too well when they lost their 2 prize zebras in 2009. The most popular animals in the park, their loss had the potential to be devastating for business. With no money to buy more zebras, the zookeepers racked their brains until they hit a crazy idea. They still had 2 donkeys. So, wasting no time, they got hold of some black hair dye and used it to paint dark stripes on the white donkeys. And they didn't do a bad job. Despite zebras being almost a foot taller than donkeys, none of the visitors seemed to notice or care. Although this guy definitely saw those telltale smudge marks. Regardless, the fake zebras were far more popular than they had been as donkeys and quickly became the zoo's main attraction. You could say they really earned their stripes. Poop to paper. If someone told you there was a way you could turn your poop into cash, you'd probably think they were pulling a prank. But at the Ulsan National Institute of Science and Technology in South Korea, this duty-fueled dream has become a reality. Cho Jae-won, a professor at the university, wanted to design an energy-efficient way of running one of the buildings on campus. His answer? This toilet. Ordinarily, it's not sat on a desk, but within the Science Walden Pavilion at the university. The toilet has a vacuum pump which draws waste into an underground bioreactor, where it's broken down, producing methane. This methane is then used to provide power to the whole building. As if that wasn't crazy enough, any student that chooses to poop on the high-tech toilet gets a set amount of virtual currency. Nicknamed Ghoul, the currency can be spent at the university shops on things like books or coffee. The scheme has become so popular that one student is quoted to have said, "I'd only ever thought of feces as dirty, but now it's a treasure of great value to me." Which is fine, as long as they don't start carrying it around in a jewelry box with them wherever they go. Deer Dilemma. The bitter winter months in Finland plunge the north of the country into a darkness that can last up to 18 hours a day. As inconvenient as this is for most people, it's potentially disastrous for reindeer breeders who lose around 4,000 deer per year in traffic accidents caused by the unending darkness. So, back in 2014, some bright breeders teamed up to think of an even brighter solution to their problem. They tried sticking reflective tape to the deer, but it just got ripped off. They thought of spraying reflective paint on the animal's fur, but this too proved ineffective. Finally, they realized that by spraying reflective paint on the antlers, car headlights were reflected back startlingly well. I've gotta say, if I was driving down the road and saw this staring at me through the darkness, I'd start reversing pronto. Unfortunately for the breeders and the deer, they'd forgotten to consider that reindeer annually shed their antlers, so the solution was only a temporary one. But still, if you've got any better ideas, share them in the comments below. Green tangerines. Most prisoners dream of escaping prison, and very occasionally, one manages to. But nobody has ever escaped in the same insane manner that the French inmate Michel Veujour did. Back in 1986, Michel was partway through serving an 18-year sentence in the Parisian prison of Les Santé. But his wife, Nadine, had other ideas and hatched a plan to bust her husband out. On a routine visit in March 1986, she slipped him a note with the exact date and time she intended for him to go free. May 28th at 10 a.m. So, what was the plan? Nadine figured that the best way of getting over the huge prison walls to break her husband out was to fly over them, specifically in a helicopter. The only problem was she'd never flown a helicopter in her life. The plan then, simply enough, was to spend the next 3 months learning. If all went well, she'd get her personal heli-pilot's license by May 27th. Then, at 10 a.m. the very next day after graduating, she'd fly a chopper onto a pre-agreed roof of the prison where she'd meet Michel and fly him out. To avoid anyone shooting her out of the sky, she bought a toy pistol and painted it black so she could brandish it threateningly from the chopper. But how would Michel get past all the guards and onto the roof to meet her? Incredibly, the answer lies with green tangerines. Michel was to slyly steal tangerines from the canteen and paint them grenade green. Then, on the day of the escape, he'd pretend they were real grenades to scare the guards from shooting at him. So, the big day came around. Amazingly, Nadine had done exactly as she'd intended, passing her helicopter exam with flying colors. And Michel was equally prepared for his daring escape. He'd enlisted the help of fellow inmate Pierre Hernandez, and together the pair began their mad dash for freedom. Waving the green tangerines around in the air like fruit-loving madmen, they bolted through the prison towards the rooftop. Miraculously, none of the prison guards opened fire. Fooled by the frightening fruit, they were all too scared to shoot and risk blowing the whole place into smithereens. Michel reached the rooftop in the nick of time. His wife was hovering above the rooftop, from which point she slung a rope down and Michel began climbing. As he neared the top, Nadine hit the gas and the pair flew away, ruthlessly abandoning Pierre still on the roof below in one of the most unbelievable prison escapes ever. And all thanks to some painted fruit. Monkey Mind Pong. Eccentric billionaire Elon Musk is well known for his wacky ideas, but none have been as crazy as one of his latest projects, Neuralink. Neuralink's aim is to strengthen the connection between man and machine by increasing the rate at which information can flow from the human brain to a computer. Basically, Musk wants us all to become cyborgs. To achieve this, he's developed a tiny computer chip that can be implanted into the brain, where it can accurately track brain activity, theoretically allowing wireless interfacing with computers. And it's already been tested on macaques. The result? Incredibly, the monkeys are able to play a game of Pong with their minds. Neuralink released footage of one such macaque called Pager. So, how does this utter madness work? Well, after the chip was installed in his brain, Pager was sat down in front of a computer. Initially, the monkey played a game with a traditional joystick. To initially teach and encourage him to play, he was given a banana-based treat every time he completed a level, from a straw attached to the machine. But as he played, the chip recorded the patterns of electrical activity in Pager's brain. Then, it mapped those signals to in-game movements. This meant that when the joystick was disconnected, the chip continued to wirelessly send information to the computer. As if by magic, Monkey Mind Pong was born. In time, Musk hopes the technology will allow people to control their phones and computers just by thinking. Eventually, it could even allow paralyzed people to talk again. Pretty amazing stuff. Just so long as Musk's final plan isn't using the chips to take over the world or anything. Surprising swordsmanship. Picture the scene. It's the Middle Ages, and you've just got into a heated argument with your arch rival. Your nemesis unsheathes their sword and charges at you, ready to swing. Right now, it would be a terrible idea to grab the blade of your sword, wouldn't it? Despite how it sounds, it might not be. The practice of holding a sword by its blade was not uncommon in medieval Europe and is depicted in many illustrations of the time. It's called half-swording, and if done correctly, could be crucial to winning a fight. For example, if your opponent has a short sword and runs in close, but you only have a long sword, they have the advantage. To get around this, you can hold the blade of your sword with one hand and the handle with the other. This gives you more precision, allowing you to retaliate. Another technique requires a firm grip of the blade with both hands. Not only can you defend against big strikes like this, but you can also bring the sword down on an opponent like a hammer. Named the Mordhau or murder stroke, this attack is super effective against armor. But wouldn't grabbing a blade with your bare hands cause some pretty nasty cuts? Not if you do it correctly. First, you have to push your palm into the side of the blade. Then, if you're careful, it's possible to wrap your fingers round the blade and grip the sword while leaving space between the sharp edge and your fingers. As long as you hold the blade with a strong enough grip, and whatever you do, don't let it slide, you won't injure yourself. Like this, it's even possible to grab the blade of your opponent's sword, just as long as you do it after they've swung and not while they're mid-strike. With all this knightly knowledge, I guarantee you'll be fighting at a cut above the rest. You know, next time you're in a sword fight, which is super common these days. Well, that's just about all the crazy ideas I can handle for now. Have you ever had an insane idea that actually worked? Let me know down in the comments, and thanks for watching.